Just because something is stylish or edgy or ambiguous or different visually or idealistically doesn't mean it's good. I rewrote the opening for this video a couple of times before finally deciding that the previous statement is what I wanted to start this video off with. Because that misconception that just because something is flashy and stylish and ambiguous doesn't mean it's executed well. Leaps and risks taken by movie makers and editors should be acknowledged and, when adequate, rewarded. But that doesn't insulate a work from criticism. Opinions and criticism is important for the growth of any medium. That being said, I didn't like Braid. Maybe I just didn't get it, which is an excuse a lot of people like to give when someone expresses a contrary view on something they hold in high regard. Oh, well, you just didn't get it. But I felt like I kept on waiting for Braid to get to the point, and it never did. Despite it getting fairly high percentage of critics giving it positive reviews, an 88% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is kind of rare for a horror movie, my feelings on the movie will probably be summarized by the title of this video. It's a highly stylized mess that seems to go out of its way to not tell a full story, despite having a very intriguing concept and very clever ending. With that out of the way, I'll now give you my spoiler warning for the rest of the video. I'm not going to say whether or not I think you personally should watch this movie, because I don't know you, and obviously there are some of you out there who might totally disagree with me and thoroughly enjoy Braid, maybe even think it's a masterpiece. I can only give you my opinions on the movie based on my perspective going into it and what I thought of some of the decisions the director and editor made. If you look up the summary for this movie on IMDb, you'll find that it is described as follows. 2 wanted women decide to rob their wealthy, psychotic friend who lives in the fantasy world they created as children. To take the money, they have to take part in a deadly, perverse game of make-believe. The premise sounds fairly straightforward, but interesting. If you then watch the trailer, you'll get a glimpse as to the vibe and aesthetic of the movie. Indie, hyper-stylized with different methods of editing and cinematography on a psychedelic level. It's at this point that many people will know whether or not this movie is something they'll be into. It's a pretty particular style. After watching this movie, I personally feel like it suffers from something that many movies are beginning to suffer from. And unfortunately, it seems as if critics will just praise and encourage this problem without really understanding the root of it. The problem I'm referring to is ambiguitis. It's when a movie is too cool or too stylish or too deep to tell the audience a full story, or provide the viewer with anything of real substance. I'm now going to run through the plot. Hopefully as I do, you'll begin to understand what I mean with the above comment. I feel the need to go through the plot summary in a little more detail than I normally do in these reviews, so you can get an idea of how convoluted everything eventually becomes without me leaving out important details. At the end of this video, I'm going to talk about a problem that I think is starting to become more and more visible with movies like this, or at least I think it's a problem. Some people may not agree, and some people might actually love it, so I'll put a timestamp of when I start that discussion in the description of the video, so if you don't want to hear the plot, but want to hear my discussion on ambiguitis, you can skip right to it. The movie starts off with the girls seemingly burying a body. This is actually a flash forward, and it's probably fairly easy for audiences to discern that this is the case. The movie then switches to what the audience are led to believe is modern day. It's slowly revealed that 2 of the girls, Petula and Tilda, are apparently drug dealers who lost $80,000 to a drug lord and have limited amount of time to pay him back. They decide to try and take the money from the safe that's located in the home of their childhood friend, Daphne. This was previously her grandparents' home. Throughout this opening sequence, including a section of the movie where they journey by train to reach Daphne's home, the movie rapidly cuts back and forth between different segments. Some seem like they could be alternate realities, some seem to be flashbacks to their childhood, and others look like they could potentially be future events, some of which you might even see in the movie itself. This is actually pretty jarring to watch, but you assume that all of these cutaways will be explained at some point and will amount to something, which they kind of do. There are also a few strange interactions the girls have as they travel to Daphne's house. The first one of note is the ticket collector Petula meets on the train. He insists that he knows her from somewhere. Petula says that she's an actress, and maybe he saw her in something she starred in. He insists that he doesn't watch TV or movies, and it's from somewhere else. It's then revealed that he knows her from a cam website or something, and in exchange for letting her and Tilda ride without a ticket, Petula slips into her mistress persona and dominates him for 5 minutes. Tilda also has an interesting interaction with a man on the train. He looks in her direction and gives a little, almost on the verge of being flirtatious kind of smile. She snaps and yells at him, causing him to grab his belongings and scurry away like a frightened rodent. When the two girls arrive in town, they have another strange interaction with a homeless man who comments to them, "You always come back." The girls are visibly weirded out by this, and they make their way to Daphne's house. As they do, pieces of a flashback of them as kids is sporadically shown. It involves the girls playing in a treehouse and getting into an argument, followed by a small fight. The result of this fight isn't shown yet to the audience. Also, it's around this time that the rules of Daphne's game are reiterated. These rules were also stated in the trailer, and it's hinted to the audience that these rules play a huge deal in the game that these girls are about to partake in. The first rule is everyone must play. The second rule is no outsiders are allowed, and the third rule is nobody leaves. The actual house and the grounds itself look stunning. The house is large, and it's looming and ancient looking with many windows and rooms giving it a truly creepy vibe. We see various things around the house as Tilda enters the kitchen, like the calendar displaying that it's the 8th day of the month, and the picture frame displaying the 3 rules. Through the strange interactions between the girls as they play the game, we see that Daphne's game is essentially a really messed up version of playing house, like they did as kids. Also, all of the details that you see as they walk into the house kind of come into play later on. Daphne is the mother. She orders Tilda to eat her food, wash her nails, brush her teeth, mother stuff. Petula is the doctor. She comes in and conducts a fake examination on Tilda that culminates in her hitting Tilda in the knee with a meat tenderizer to test her reflexes. At this point, I'm going to do a little aside and point out that you might be confused at this point in the plot summary. That's actually appropriate because I was actually almost as confused watching it. This feeling of confusion is something I thought would be alleviated as the movie went on and more information was given, but it never went away, right up until the last frame. Later on in the movie, it begins to become apparent that Tilda and Petula are not just players in this game. They're almost captives to Daphne. She even has Tilda tied to a chair at dinner. Later that night, Petula is exploring the house and runs into Daphne, who begins kissing her. Petula intimates having sex with her on the kitchen table as Tilda listens from her room. The next morning, Tilda and Petula meet outside the house by the mailbox to discuss the previous day's events. They reiterate that once they find the money, then they're out of there. Tilda then discovers that the drug she had been taking, which she thought was Vicodin, was actually psychedelics. She then goes on to a drug-induced frenzy, running around the grounds of the house, and the colors and the cinematography of the movie get all crazy. Trees turn purple, the camera gets extra shaky, and Tilda begins seeing visions of the 3 girls as kids. It then switches to a flashback, where it's revealed that the fight they had in the treehouse when they were little resulted in Daphne falling out of the tree and onto the ground, sending her to the hospital and making her unable to conceive children. When the detective, Detective Siegel, questions Petula and Tilda as to how Daphne fell, Petula puts some kind of keychain with a ball or something in his hand, and this apparently explains everything. I honestly have no idea what this thing was or why it was so important. I'm positive that I missed the part where the movie explains what this is, because the scene makes absolutely no sense without that context. I hope I missed the scene where they explain what that was. The movie then cuts back to modern day, and you can see Daphne has scores of pregnancy tests, which obviously are all coming back negative. It's at this point that many viewers might feel as though they are starting to understand what's going on. Daphne went crazy because she knew she couldn't have kids. That's why she's obsessed with playing house and taking out her frustrations on the two friends who caused her condition. That would be the normal conclusion a perceptive viewer would make. This isn't correct though, and by the end of the movie you realize just how incorrect this perfectly reasonable assumption was. The movie then cuts to Petula, who is now also running around the house in a drug-induced frenzy. It cuts back and forth between different, seemingly random sequences, including a moment where Petula opens a door and gets burned on her arm. This causes her to freak out even more. She grabs her car keys with the intention of leaving. Before Petula and Tilda can leave, however, Daphne knocks them both out. The movie then cuts to Detective Spiegel, the detective from earlier, who is in his kitchen. We watch this long sequence as he cleans up and leaves the home, gets into his car, and drives to the police station. He still has the keychain on his car keys. As he arrives at the police station, we see he is one of the detectives looking for Petula and Tilda, supposed drug dealers. He gets a phone call and says he will take care of something that isn't disclosed to the audience yet. The movie then cuts back to the girls. Daphne has Petula and Tilda captive in a room. There are braids twisted around their heads and in their mouths. I'm not sure what's supposed to be holding them in place, but they act as though they're being restrained here somehow. This is an odd scene also because, again, unless I missed something, besides the title of the movie, these braids come out of absolutely nowhere. To my memory, the movie established nothing in regards to long magical hair that can restrain people. This could be a reference to the dollhouse, as dollhouses are frequently shown flash throughout the movie, or dolls in general since they are still playing house the same way they did when they were kids, but without more context it's almost impossible to tell, and any sort of definite answer seems like it would be a reach at this point. This is also where the movie's nasty habit of just filming things upside down for no reason starts to get annoying. There are random shots in these scenes that are just upside down, for no apparent reason other than to be visibly jarring to the audience, as if seeing two girls chewing on long braids of hair wasn't jarring enough. Anyway, the detective shows up at Daphne's house saying the neighbors heard yelling. They talk for a little bit and he inquires about Petula and Tilda, who are now fugitives. Daphne claims to not know where they are. He hears screaming coming from upstairs, but he is stopped from going up there by Daphne, who insists on a search warrant. This scene didn't make too much sense, like a lot of the movie, even though they try to explain why this happened later on. He's there investigating the neighbors' complaints of yelling. Daphne lets him into the house. He hears yelling coming from upstairs. This could easily be seen as probable cause for a detective to explore further to get to the bottom of what's going on. Nope, he gives in and leaves, saying if he hears any more complaints from the neighbors, he will get a warrant. There are random segments of their conversation that are in black and white. The movie does this a couple of times in various scenes. I don't know if the black and white is meant to signify something because, like everything else in the movie, it's so random and sporadic that it's unclear if things were done with an intent to service the plot or characters, or to simply randomly change things to be visually jarring. I really can't stand when movies do this. Skip a little forward now, past some scenes of Daphne looking through the windows of a dollhouse while Tilda frantically wanders the hallways of the real house. They then all sit at a dinner table. After dismissing Tilda, Daphne and Petula speak. Daphne tells her that if she can find the safe with the money, she can keep it and leave. She also gives her a little riddle to solve. Daphne is also wearing the green dress that we see in a couple of the cutaways, implying that those were all flash forwards. After finishing the movie, it's still unclear if that was the case. Petula then tries to solve the riddle, first by going to the statue of the three girls, which gives her the clue to look in the, quote, rotting halls. She goes into the house in the hallway and spots a sundial with a large crack in the ceiling. She follows the crack to a mirror in one of the rooms. Eliminating all light from the room, the mirror reveals a glow-in-the-dark clue that leads her to removing the calendar off the wall. Behind that is the safe, which she is able to unlock using the numbers given with each clue. Petula collects the money and goes to tell Tilda they can leave. As they try to leave, though, Daphne hunts them down in the road and hits Petula with her car. Petula awakens, strapped to a chair, no visible injuries from just getting hit by a car. Daphne menacingly explains that she said Petula could leave, but not Tilda, and now they're going to be punished. She moves the chair Petula is strapped to into another room where Tilda sits locked in some kind of a cage. For me, this is the movie's most infuriating moment when it came to cinematography. Daphne moves around the cage in a threatening manner while Petula is still strapped to the chair. This entire sequence is filmed upside down. It's a 1.5-minute long segment of the movie that is just upside down. What was the purpose of this? Whose perspective is the audience supposed to be adopting here? I mean, you can make excuses or explanation for this all day by saying, oh, by putting it upside down, the cage that Tilda is in kind of looks like a baby's crib, which fits with the mother theme, or, oh, this is a metaphor about how Petula and Tilda's plans are being turned upside down, or, oh, it's simply part of the explanation at the end where they reveal that everything is part of the game. But I think that any logical explanation of this is a stretch, even the director's. I pointed out my frustration with the choice of camera work and editing in this scene to another channel that also reviews horror movies, specifically this one, and the response I got was, it was to show how everything was a dream and fairy tale and make-believe. The director says this in her interviews. Here's the problem with that. Just because you state your intention in an interview outside the original work doesn't automatically mean that it was executed well. What if I made a movie about a couple and had a scene where they just sat there for 5 minutes looking at each other, and then people criticized the scene for being immensely boring? But then I come out in an interview and say, oh, well, the couple staring at each other for 5 minutes was to silently convey the rising tension between them and their inability to vocalize their concerns about the relationship. Does the fact that I made the statement make the scene any less boring? Does the fact that I stated my intention justify me putting it into the film? Does it invalidate the opinions of those who found it massively uninteresting? In the movie Braid, they use a ton of different filming styles and editing techniques. Some of them reinforce the point that this was supposed to be a dreamlike experience, something not totally real, half in reality, half not. Other times, it just felt like they were messing with different filters and angles in Movie Maker and then picking the ones that looked the craziest to trigger a wow, that's a different style response from viewers and audience members. I would even go as far to argue that this is the same thought process as the person who in the Jason Bourne movies thought it would be a good idea to shake the camera during a fight sequence so the viewer feels like they're part of the fight. They had their intention, but their execution ended up giving most people headaches and dizziness while we watched the movie. So to close out this rant, I'll just say that I understand what the director was trying to convey with the different camera techniques and editing. I understand the intention. It's the execution that I disagree with. It just seemed too random, too jarring, not intentional, and thought out. Okay, so with that out of the way, Daphne then punishes Petula by cutting her mouth Joker style. And yes, this is filmed upside down. Somewhere in this area, the movie cuts to a scene with the detective from earlier, Detective Spiegel, talking to the homeless man from the beginning of the movie. The homeless man reveals to him that he saw the girls, and the detective takes off for Daphne's house. We then move to a scene where Tilda and Petula are free and sitting in a corner. They're approached by Daphne, who tells them the game is over. Tilda starts to berate Daphne, saying she's a monster and can't have children, despite Daphne insisting that she's pregnant. She says she can feel the baby and that the baby belongs to Doctor, who the movie established at this point to be Petula. She also says that he is coming for all of them. It is unclear who she's talking about. Petula, now with cuts on her face from the previous punishment, resumes her role as Doctor and tells Daphne she needs an appointment regarding her baby. The scene then cuts to Petula and Tilda in operating scrubs and Daphne on an operating table. Petula and Tilda are now going to extract their revenge on Daphne for everything she put them through. Before they're able to do this, however, Detective Siegel shows up and is about to arrest Petula and Tilda. Daphne intervenes, and Tilda and Daphne begin beating Siegel to death with tools. Petula is at first horrified, but then they get her involved by handing her the meat tenderizer and encouraging her to participate. The next scene goes back to the first scene in the movie. They're burying the dead body, only now the audience knows that the dead body is Detective Siegel. They also roll his car into a lake to hide it. At this point in the movie, Tilda and Daphne now look like they're getting along. A couple of minutes later, the movie cuts to a scene of the three girls eating at a dinner table. They all seem to be happy. Petula no longer has scars, and they hold hands and eat together. They then cut to a scene of Petula shaving and dancing and singing crazily while Daphne and Tilda continue the mother-daughter roleplay in the kitchen. The movie cuts to Petula again, and we see blood appearing to be spurting out of somewhere, but there are no visible cuts, and she continues to shave. We then see the girls in a pillow fight. There's a shot of them in the same room wearing white masks, and then we come to a sequence where the girls are hanging out outside. Tilda and Daphne suddenly disappear, and Petula goes looking for them. Instead, she's surprised when Detective Siegel, or perhaps his ghost or her guilty projection of him, jumps out at her from behind a pillar. It turns out he wasn't really there, and then Tilda and Daphne reappear and laugh, pretending it was a joke and they just wanted Petula to look for them. Petula, now very disturbed, and even more so after looking in the mailbox and finding the keychain from earlier there instead of their phones, goes to dig up Siegel's grave only to find out he's not actually there. She then sits in the living room panicking. The movie swaps from this to her on the train in the same position. She gets up and goes to the train bathroom and looks in the mirror. The camera pans over, and now she's looking into the mirror in the house. It turns out that they are both the same. I know I haven't given this movie much praise until this point, but I liked this sequence a lot. It reinforced the twist of the movie without totally giving it away yet. Perceptive viewers will start to understand what's happening at this point. Petula is on the train. She's also in the house. The mirror in the house is the same as the mirror in the train. She walks through the hallways of the house just like she walked down the aisle of the train. They are the same. The house and the train are the same place. Everything is imaginary, and everything is make-believe. If the audience didn't put it together at this point, the next scene pretty much spells it out. Petula finds a book under the couch where she sticks her gum. This was shown in a flashback / flash forward earlier in the movie, but I can't remember if I mentioned it. The book spells out everything, all aspects of the game, from the train ride to their plans on finding the safe. Daphne then approaches Petula and begins to tell her what is happening in a very roundabout way. Everything she went through and is going through is part of the game. Apparently the train wasn't real, the train conductor isn't real, neither was their previous occupation as drug dealers. Not even Detective Siegel was real. It was all simply part of the game. And every time they play, Petula escapes, causing them to punish her via the burns on her arms. Tilda eventually enters and confirms all this. The movie goes back to the first scene of Tilda and Petula talking to reinforce that they were in the house the entire time. We then cut to a shot of all three girls in a bathtub together. The movie then cuts back and forth between a couple of different scenes. The girls as kids together in a tent talking about dreams. Petula committing suicide by hanging herself in a bedroom. Tilda in a bathtub also apparently committing suicide. And then Daphne taking some kind of poison and walking outside to die on a bench. The final scene of the movie is Daphne humming in the kitchen, now an old woman. She is cooking as she was when we first saw her. The doorbell rings. Someone enters, presumably Tilda. The game starts over again. Let me get a few things out of the way before I get into the criticism. I really like the concept for this movie, and I think the ending was actually really well done. In fact, I probably have more appreciation for how the ending tied things together after spending so much time writing this review. There were also little pieces of cinematic genius in this movie, such as cutting between Petula in the house and the train, her looking through the mirror only to reveal it is the same mirror as the house. These all seem like deliberate choices made to reinforce the theme of the movie and to build towards the twist. I also understood and appreciated how the movie got more and more crazy towards the end, with cuts and flashes and scenes coming out of almost nowhere to show that reality wasn't what it appeared to be. Again, This made sense within the confines of the story and reinforced the twist. I also thought that the acting was incredibly well done. All three actresses were awesome in this movie, and their portrayal of Daphne, Tilda, and Petula were spot on. This speaks to their talent as actresses considering how many different emotions they had to convey during the course of this movie, from fearful to angry to almost psychotic. However, this movie did have some major faults. There were just so many other things that were included in this movie that muddled up the main story. I talked about a few of those items during the plot summary, so I won't get into those particular items again here. Instead, I want to point out a problem that I'm starting to see with movies like this one, and that problem is called ambiguitis. This is when a movie tries so hard to be mysterious and give the audience as little information as possible, but doesn't necessarily have the plot to back it up. I don't mind a movie being overly ambiguous as to what's going on, but for me, there has to be a satisfying payoff in order for all that mystery and ambiguity to have been worth something, such as a movie like Memento, Upstream Color, or even The Void. So while Braid did have a clever twist, I don't think that the twist was a good enough payoff for the amount of confusion they intentionally created within the movie. Scenes like where the titular braid was wrapped around the girls' heads, where did this come from? What precedent was set for this? Again, it's possible that I missed some detail within the movie, but I don't think an explanation for this is provided anywhere other than, oh, it's just part of the game. Another thing I found odd was the inclusion of the scenes with the detective. If he was simply in the girls' heads, why were there multiple scenes of him away from the girls, like when he was in his home or the police station? Once again, maybe I missed a detail or something somewhere in the movie and it was revealed that the police station and his house were actually rooms within the mansion. I don't think I did though. Or is this yet another thing that can be explained away by, it was just part of the game, or it was written in the book? Could Daphne have kids or not? If the detective wasn't real, did the accident really happen? Or maybe the accident and the detective were real and Daphne just created her own version of him for the storyline in the game. Did every round of the game end with them committing apparent suicide? What was the purpose? I realize that they said a few things about dreams and breaking time's spell, but I don't think that covered it. Or was all of this simply just part of the game as well? Do you see the problem here? The movie throws so many details and problems and situations at you that it doesn't really have to explain, because the overarching explanation for everything in the movie by the end is, oh, it's just part of the game. To wash away every problem and unanswered question as being part of the game without giving any valid reason as to why is a cop-out in my opinion. So now let's go back to the IMDb description of the movie. Two wanted women decide to rob their wealthy psychotic friend who lives in the fantasy world they created as children. To take the money, they have to take part in a deadly, perverse game of make-believe. After watching the movie, the true summary can then be revised to be, three women are perpetually stuck in a loop of playing a make-believe game over and over, warping reality and making viewers, and the girls themselves, question what is real and what is not. It seems almost as if they came up with this premise, decided how they wanted it to end, with Daphne as an old woman in a callback to an earlier scene, and the details in the middle they filled in somewhat sporadically, knowing it could just be explained away by, it's just part of the game the girls are perpetually playing. I'll now return to the statement I made in the very beginning of this video. Just because something is stylish or edgy or ambiguous or different, visually or idealistically, doesn't mean it's good. Just because the director chooses to have a jarring editing style and wacky camera angles and abrupt cuts doesn't put that film above criticism. Even though the ultimate story and concept of Braid is a unique and clever one and the acting was very well done, its execution simply didn't do it for me. It felt random just to be random, jarring just to be jarring, and confusing just to be confusing. And in my opinion, a lot of these creative decisions didn't service the plot in any positive way. But hey, feel free to dismiss my opinion as incorrect, since it's all part of the game. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you want more content. Follow me on Twitter for updates and other things. If you want to support this channel further, feel free to check out my Patreon. Other than that, I'll see you guys in the next one, and if you have any movies that you want me to watch and review, leave them in the comments below, and if I haven't seen it, I'll check them out.